Okay, welcome to the vlog. If you're new here, my name is Chris and I build productivity apps. I usually focus on one productivity app for video, so today we're focusing on Luna. Quick context, Luna is a budgeting app that I created to help me curb spending, and it's also just a project for me to get better as a developer and a designer. So that's the app that we're gonna be talking about today. So about 3 weeks ago, launched the beta of the app. You can go check out the last video if you haven't seen it. I go through the process of preparing and launching that beta. It's a pretty basic app. You can log transactions, categories, all the basics you would find in a simple budgeting app. So that was released, and over the last 3 weeks, I ended up onboarding about 500 people from the waitlist, which, by the way, when I published the video and released the beta, through that video alone, 1,500 people ended up joining the waitlist so far. So the waitlist is now at 2,000 people. There's actually a huge amount of people for a waitlist for an app made by a solo app developer. So we have a lot more people that are willing to test the app, which thank you guys so much for joining. I decided to actually onboard about 500 people to the app. We're gonna be talking about how this beta is going, and more specifically, the lessons that I've learned, because I've learned a ton of things over the last 3 weeks, and what are the changes that I plan on making from those lessons. And I'm gonna keep it pretty real with you guys. Some of these numbers do not look that great. I want to show you guys what it really looks like to build and launch an app. So not going to sugarcoat anything. These will be real numbers. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so after launching the beta, the first thing I did was onboard 25 users. So these first 25 users, it was just all word of mouth. There was no analytics installed. They would just be giving me feedback through email or sometimes just on a phone call. They gave me a ton of little improvements, like for example, improvements to the date picker. When you're changing like which week you're looking at, the date picker wasn't that great, so made a lot of improvements based on the feedback. Spacing issues on smaller devices, because I was just testing it on my device, which is an iPhone 15, but I just didn't check it on smaller devices. And then a ton of other smaller bugs that they identified. This was the most simple round of feedback collection, just 25 users, caught a lot of things in the process. Then I onboarded the next 100 users. Before I onboarded them though, this time I decided to actually install analytics. So for analytics, I'm using a service called PostHog. They have a very generous free plan. That's why I'm using it. So I installed it in the app, and I'm just tracking a bunch of interactions, like whenever a transaction is logged, whenever a category is created, when a user signs up. But there's one main reason that I installed it, and there's one thing that I'm looking for. It's retention. So there's a ton of ways to track retention, and retention means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. For me, retention means, are users actually using the app? The way that I'm tracking retention, which I'm using this word very loosely, or at least the way that I know I'm on the right track, is by looking at this chart. So this chart basically shows me how many users that sign up actually create a transaction within 48 hours. In theory, if things are going well, this number should be very high. Like when someone signs up, they should be at least creating one transaction in the app. If that number is low, then that signals to me there's a problem. Maybe something's not clear enough, maybe the onboarding is not good. This is the first thing that I decided to track and look at. And I want to reiterate, this is not a traditional way to track retention. There's so many other ways to track retention, so many better ways to track retention, but for the purposes of my app, with the limited time frame that I'm working with for this beta period, this was the best solution I can come up with to kind of track, am I on the right path to improving retentions? So that's kind of what I wanted to get out of the analytics that I just installed into the app. So once the analytics were installed, I decided to onboard the next 100 people, and I started watching this metric of, how many people after sign up created a transaction. After letting this sit for over 48 hours, out of the 100 people, only 3 people actually created a transaction. So after seeing that, I realized, okay, that's not good. I need to go figure out what's going on. First thing I did was I started reaching out to people who dropped off and, just started asking them, hey, how's it going? Like, how's the app? Are you finding it useful? I know that they're not actually using it. So anyone who told me like, oh, I love it, it's awesome, kind of just ignored their feedback a little bit. But there were a lot of people who were honest with me and told me, oh yeah, I don't really use it. I ended up dropping off. And there were 2 common things that I kept hearing from people. So the first thing I kept hearing was a lot of people saying, I didn't know where to start. Like I signed up, didn't know what categories to create, and then just kind of closed the app and gave up. So that was the first piece of feedback I heard. Then the second one was set it all up and everything, but I just forgot to use the app. Like I forgot to log the transactions. So those were the 2 main things I heard, which were extremely valid and very, very good points. Okay, so let's look at that first point, and we'll talk about some of the changes that I made to try to improve this. So the first point is I just didn't know where to start after I signed up. Like I didn't know what categories to create. So after hearing this, I decided to see, okay, let me try to sign up for the app and put myself in their shoes. So after I signed up, I realized, oh yeah, users are just kind of kicked to this blank screen that says add a category, and there's not really any instructions, there's no prompting. I guess that would be kind of hard to know, like, what kind of category should I put here? Another thing I decided to actually check out too, to confirm this, because I have the analytics installed, I was able to run this number, and turns out 70% of the people who signed up never created a category in the first place. I think a lot of people really felt this pain point. They don't really know what categories to create, they get kind of stuck. So the first solution I decided to try was to improve the onboarding flow and add a step to help people create those categories. So That way, when they're done with the onboarding, at least they don't have this blank screen. They'll have some categories to work with. So I added this step where users can pick from a bunch of common categories, and then they can start allocating money, and then they're taken to the app where they can start logging transactions. So I quickly onboarded another 20 beta testers just to test this out. I was instantly hit with feedback on that from these beta testers who said, oh, the category suggestion was great, but I genuinely don't know how much to allocate to each of these categories. Is there any way you can kind of, give recommendations or help us out here? So after hearing that, I was like, okay, that's actually pretty valid too. If you're new to budgeting, you genuinely don't know, is it appropriate to put 50% of your income into eating out? So this one actually required some creativity to handle. So I tested a lot of sign-up flows for a bunch of different budgeting apps, and I noticed like a lot of them have really lengthy onboarding flows where they ask a lot of questions. A lot of them just pull bank transactions and try to help you make a budget based on that. I really wanted to avoid any like complex walkthroughs or investing a lot of time into this. I decided to try something a little more experimental, and what if I used AI to actually help make those recommendations? So I made a quick prototype of this where after the user selects the categories, there's a little pop-up that says, oh, are you having trouble with this? Do you want us to recommend a budget allocation for each of these categories based on your monthly income? I decided to create this very simple prompt. Given the user's post-tax income, allocate that money according to what's called the 50-30-20 rule, which is one of many budgeting methodologies, but it was a really simple one that I decided to go with for this first version. Basically, the 50-30-20 rule is 50% of your money goes to needs, 30% goes to wants, and 20% goes towards savings. I think that's actually a pretty good strategy. Made the simple endpoint, made the simple prompts. When the user feeds in, here are the categories, here's my income level, it's gonna try to allocate that money based on that 50-30-20 spend rule. And the results were actually pretty good when I tested it out. I haven't seen a budgeting app do this, but this is pretty interesting. Tested with a couple friends, made a couple tweaks, and I was actually pretty happy with the results. This is at least good enough as a starting point for users where it'll make some recommendations. So once that was added, I onboarded another 400 users, and I think the results were much better. So we went from 3% of people signing up and logging a transaction to around 30% logging a transaction. Still not great, to be honest, but massive improvement, and I do think that this made a big difference. So the importance of onboarding was one of the first lessons I learned here. There's so many other improvements that I can make to the onboarding, especially on that AI recommendation side, to make this a lot more useful, but this is a really good starting point. Every week, I'm just gonna start improving on that. So with the solution in place for that feedback, let's go back to the other drop-off reason that people were giving, which was, I just forgot that the app existed. So this one's a little bit more challenging to solve, but because this is an iOS app, I actually have two things at my disposal to try to help improve the chances of people remembering the app. And so that's notifications and widgets. So I've learned this with my other app, Ellie. These two things actually make a huge difference in getting people to remember that your app exists. The notifications don't have to be complex. Like these could just be reminder notifications in the morning to tell the users, don't forget to log your transactions for the day. That notification significantly increases the chances of users remembering to use your app. Same thing with widgets, both on the lock screen and the home screen. Every time the user opens their phone and they see your widget, that's just another opportunity for them to remember, oh wow, I forgot, I gotta log these transactions. For my other app, Ellie, I made the mistake of actually implementing them pretty late into the process. If I could go back in time, I would have done that way sooner because I think it actually did make a huge difference in getting people to remember to use the app. So when I released the app, I actually did code a lock screen widget, and this is what it looks like. It shows you how much you spent throughout the week. I forgot to track the number of installs on the lock screen widget. I need to go back and do that. What I decided to do was actually pull 30 random users who signed up for the app and just ask them, which features are you finding useful? Are you using the lock screen widget? 0 people knew that there was a lock screen widget. So I knew that that was something I needed to fix. So what I decided to do was actually add a step in the onboarding to let people know, hey, by the way, there is a lock screen widget, which I think will actually improve the chances of them installing significantly. I also coded up a home screen widget, which is a way more common widget that people install on their phones, and then also added that to the onboarding. So now when you sign up, you're greeted with this awesome screen that says, by the way, we have widgets. So hopefully people will actually install these widgets, and that'll improve the chances of them remembering that the app exists. So once the widgets were done, I decided to implement notifications, and more specifically, reminder notifications. So there were a ton of ways I could have done this, but I decided what I settled on was letting people have the options of choosing the frequency of those reminders. So now you have 4 different options to choose from. You can either turn them off completely, you can get gentle reminders, so that's just like 2 reminders a day, like 1 in the morning and then 1 in the afternoon if you haven't logged anything. Then there's more aggressive reminders, and that's like 4 reminders every single day. And then there's like relentless reminders. So this is for people who feel like, I actually really want to budget and I need that extra push. We're gonna send you like 10 reminders throughout the day, reminding you to go log transactions. I already learned how to do notifications for my other app, Ellie, so this one wasn't too bad. Also decided to throw this on the onboarding. There's another screen that asks you, hey, do you want to enable notifications? So I also forgot to add tracking to that, so Actually, maybe I did add tracking to that. Okay, yeah, I did not track that. Gotta go track that and see if people are actually clicking on it. My hope is that people actually do enable that. Hopefully that combination of the reminders and the lock screen is gonna improve the chances of people remembering that the app exists. With all the changes that we made, ended up with 3% of people signing up and actually logging a transaction to around 30%, which is a huge improvement, but honestly still not good enough. There's still a lot of changes that I can make to try to bump that number up. If I had to boil down the process of trying to improve the app, it is really just look at retention, make changes, look at retention, make changes, and just try to get that retention up, because at the end of the day, what it means is users are finding value in the app. If they sign up and drop off, they're not finding value. So aside from these two big things, there was so much amazing feedback from users in terms of feature requests. So right now you could just track spending, but a lot of people have asked, can I also track my income? And so like positive transactions, which is a pretty good idea. I've seen a lot of budgeting apps do this, so I think I'm definitely gonna be adding that. Some way to account for savings. So there's no concept of savings in this app right now. After hearing some of the use cases from some users, being able to like add to an emergency fund and then be able to pull from that for, let's say, car expenses. That actually sounds like something I would use personally. So that's 100% something I'm gonna be adding. One really cool improvement to the widgets, which one user recommended, was to add privacy mode. So I guess they don't want people to see, how much money they're spending on their home screen if, they're with friends or people looking over their shoulder. They suggested that when you click on it, just hide the number. And then when you click it, it'll reveal the number. So I implemented this privacy mode. It came out really, really well. It's actually very fun to click it and just watch that animation happens. So shout out to Robert for recommending that. Honestly, one of my favorite parts of the app. And so with all of these awesome things, starting to get a really good sense of the roadmap for this app. So thank you everyone who reached out and gave in suggestions. You guys are actually really gonna shape the direction of this app. So the final thing I wanted to address was how long am I going to keep the beta running? My goal is to actually release the app in the next 2 weeks. Probably actually just do 1 or 2 more rounds of beta and try to invite all 2,000 people on that wait list. A lot of people might be thinking, wait, so the beta is only like 1-2 months? That doesn't seem like a lot of time to test. And the main reason that it's pretty bad to have a long beta period, at least in my case, I'm probably gonna be missing out on a lot of feedback that I would get if I launched the thing publicly. Something I learned from my other app, Ellie, was that users who were beta testing Ellie for me 2 years ago were completely different than the users who actually use Ellie today. Originally, I was testing it with a bunch of my technical friends, people who were in software development. A lot of the feedback I was getting was around, can you add a GitHub integration? Can you add a Jira integration? Once I launched publicly and the app was available to download on the App Store, it's a lot of students, it's a lot of teachers, it's a lot of families and parents. Things that they request are so different. Like none of them know what GitHub is. A lot of the things that they request are like an Apple Calendar integration, which is something that the beta users who were using Ellie originally would never request. They all use Google Calendar or Outlook. So that was a lesson I learned from my other app, and I think the same thing is gonna apply here. If I don't get this out publicly, I will probably be missing out on a lot of good feedback. So I wanna get this thing out as quickly as possible. I'm just giving myself like 2 more iterations max of this. So that was the last thing I wanted to point out. Learning a ton of things from this one. This has been a really cool experience, and thank you guys so much for joining the waitlist, for watching the videos. The amount of support on the last video was so overwhelming for me. So many thoughtful comments in there with really good feedback. I really appreciate every single person who's taken the time to comment and try to help make the app better. So I'll close it out with that. If you guys like this kind of content, definitely check out my Instagram and TikTok. I post almost every other day about building a productivity app. And obviously, if you like this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.